It is my very great pleasure to introduce our speakers for this evening, Derek and Jen Richey, the authors of the book, which has been circulating Bloomington Then and Now.
All right.
You want to show it, Emily? Yes, there it is. All right.
Great. I'll let you start, Jen.
Okay. Hi. I'm Jen, so I'm the other half of the project. I guess I want to start by, complimenting Bedford on all these old buildings and homes that are still standing.
Yeah.
The square is
Beautiful.
obviously the original, so that's pretty amazing. I guess what I try to do is give a little bit of a history of how our project even started. We kind of started taking pictures of old houses that were abandoned. And he has always been kind of a history geek. So kind of what happened is I was looking at photos, because that's one of my kind of interests. I love looking at pictures and, of pretty much anything. And I saw this picture of Paris, and somebody was holding up a picture of Paris in the 1800s, like right at the same spot. So I called Derek and I'm like, hey, you've got to see this picture. And I mean, he was pretty amazed by it. So of course this gets, the mind starts going. And literally the next day he was like, we're going to do this for Bloomington. So what we started to do was kind of go to the History Center and find old photos that existed of old homes and old buildings that used to be there. One of the things that I love about the concept is I grew up in a really small town. We didn't really have a north, south, east, or west. So, when you look at pictures of buildings, and they're just old pictures of buildings, but what we have done is actually show you where they would be located and what's there now. So, I may not remember the road, but I know where that's at because I'm around Bloomington all the time. So for people that are like me, I guess, that are directionally challenged, it's perfect because it does give that concept. So, again, so you can kind of connect with what was there. Let's see, is there anything I'm missing?
I think that's pretty much it. Maybe the definition of the fading. Yeah,
the definition of the fading is kind of what we do in the book. There's some books over here. Anybody's more than welcome to kind of look at them so you can see. What we have done is we have pictures we'll have a picture of the old house. So a home from the 1800s. I mean, I can use the example, the Garrett house that's now an antique shop in
the Batman house.
Batman, yes, in Bloomington. So what we'll do is, it's probably not a good example.
No, because that one's still standing.
It's still standing. Darn it.
Well, essentially, we'll take a building that isn't standing, and that's how we got the name. We kind of faded the old building back into the modern setting, and that gave people the context of what was standing there before.
Yeah. And the middle picture is kind of ghost. It's kind of a ghost, so you can kind of see through the building, and you start seeing where it's actually located now. And then the last picture, of course, is what is there now. So if it's a gas station or anything like that. So it's kind of amazing that a family project wound up turning into what it was, a book. It was never anticipated. Derek started putting these pictures and the things that we were doing up on Facebook, thinking, maybe there would be a few people that would enjoy it, and it just took off. There's so many people that live in Bloomington that just are dying to share their stories, that know so much history. And I think without the support of the community and their stories and, what part they took into what we've been able to make it, I mean, it couldn't be what it is. I've learned so much just out of reading the Facebook comments, and hopefully I can get that up for you so you guys can see kind of how we did that and where we were allowed to actually start the conversation about Bloomington history. So I'll let my husband take over.
Thank you, honey. All right, so that kind of takes care of what is Bloomington fading. And people kind of always said, well, fading, that sounds so negative. Well, we didn't really start it to be negative. It was just kind of the process of fading the old picture in with the new one. We would see it kind of disappear. So we said, well, Bloomington fading, and I think we started off, well, maybe that sounds too negative, but that's what actually happens in the photo. So we'll skip past this because What I like to do before we get started is just usually to give people some context of how much things have changed in Bloomington, and I'm sure they've changed quite a bit here in Bedford too. This is Kirkwood, the main strip, East Kirkwood, in Bloomington. And all the white boxes that you can see, that I'm now stepping on this mic, all the little white boxes here are whole blocks that are now missing. And a lot of people seem to think that these buildings came down, the last 20 years. You get a lot of people that feel that way. But the truth is, most of them came down between 1948 and 1975. In fact, all the boxes here, that's when that happened. And of course, there are lots of different reasons for that. Bloomington at one point was a very rich town with a lot of, limestone barons. And of course, you had Showers Furniture there. And by the time the 50s and the 70s came around, a lot of those old families were gone. And the money was gone as well. And so a lot of these houses became rentals, and they started to kind of fall apart. And nobody really had the money to fix them. And so the children who had inherited these homes decided in many ways it would be better to sell it off to development companies who tore them down, of course, and built something new. But it also has to do with the change in the whole idea of architecture from the 50s to the 70s. A lot of the old Victorians were kind of looked at as dinosaurs. We were heading towards the Jetson era, and, those old Victorians didn't really fit into that picture. So this is just an idea of what happened on that little stretch of Kirkwood from Indiana to Walnut. And you can see by year how, the number of the buildings that were demolished. 61, there were 11, 67, there were 6, and 75, there was 14. So total, 31 of those buildings were gone, which is nearly 50% of all the structures demolished between 1949 and 1979 along just that strip of Kirkwood. Same thing can be said for Walnut and College themselves. So let's take a look at old Kirkwood and see what it used to look like. And we're going to start back 100 years. And as you can see, looking from the sample gates towards downtown, so you'll be looking, this is looking west. This is almost the exact same spot, and you can tell because the Capitol, or the courthouse top is sticking out of both photos. And what is very clear at this point is there were a lot of trees, but also that Kirkwood was a residential neighborhood.
So what's really neat about this picture, if you look, you can see the courthouse, the top of the... Yeah. So that's kind of how we were able to get the angle correct from the postcard. And
actually on the far right of the old photo is 527 East Kirkwood, which we'll run into again here as we move forward. All right, so this is looking down. This is again from standing at the sample gates, except now we're looking north up Indiana. And this is before 1915, and we know that because Kirkwood is still unpaved, and so is Indiana in the far right side. And the streets weren't paved until 1915. And again, Indiana, as you can see on the left, is pretty much parking lots and, open space, and it was very residential at one point. This is 527 East Kirkwood. It used to stand on the northwest corner of Indiana and Kirkwood. It was demolished in before 1961, date unsure, for parking. It was known as the Ritter, and it was built by the Bloomington architect. I think the guy at one point built half of Bloomington or designed half of it, and that's John L. Nichols. And this is from his scrapbook, and this is about as good as the quality gets from his, unfortunately, from the museum. This is about as good. But if it were still standing today, it would be right there. So that would be on the corner of Kirkwood in Indiana. And of course, as I said, it was demolished for parking. So as we move on to the next one, this is what was called the Arbutus Flats. So now we're heading down Kirkwood. And as we head west on Kirkwood, this would have been on your left. And it was at 414 East Kirkwood. It was demolished by 1975, and later it became a double-decker McDonald's. Some of you might remember, but today it's a Chipotle.
Which is owned by McDonald's, by the way.
Right. the interesting thing is, in this photo, if you go back, you'll see that this photo, or this house here, is actually still standing in the original. If you go back one, you can see the shape of it back here. And as we go forward, it's still there. So you can get a real, those are the kind of things we have to look for when we're taking these photos. Because if we're off, we don't put the building back where it used to be, somebody lets us know. You're 15, yeah. A lot of local historians will tell us, you're 15 feet off to the left. Yeah.
The house on, there's a big house or apartment house on 6th Street, right to south of Poplar. Looks very similar to that building, except not quite as big. Were they built the same?
Right. They were, actually this building was built with Martinsville bricks. It was built a little later. But there is another building called Margaret Hall, which we're going to look at later, which was built by the same architect as the building you're talking about as well. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. And that's what it looked like if it was still there today. We left some of the modern walkers. Yeah.
Was that housing? Was that?
It was an apartment complex. Yeah.
For the school probably?
It was students, a lot of the people that we know that used to live in there as children, it was families. I know the Letelier baking, the brothers who had the baking company, they lived in there for a while, Joe Letelier. And Mary Lou Mitchell's mother and father lived there for a while. So they were apartments, and some students did manage to squeeze in, but the students had a lot of other options, and we'll see some of them as we go forward. But this is from the top. You can see Arbutus Flats in pink. Next to it is what you just mentioned, sir, which is St. Margaret's Hall, and we'll see another photo where that used to stand here coming up. All right. But before we move too far down the street, we'll start with the Von Lee, which still stands, at least that little tiny chunk of it in the front, which is, I guess, better than nothing. The movie on the left that's playing is First Love, starring Susan Day and William Katz. So if that gives you any idea, that's about 1977 versus 2011. The next, a lot of you who've been to Bloomington know Nick's English Hut. Of course, today it stands 3 stories high. Wasn't always that way. It was just a, small little place to go and eat and drink beer, single floor. So this is the 1950s versus today. This is near Walnut and Kirkwood in the early 1900s. Again, we know that because the road's not paved yet. As you can see, this is from the Monroe County collection. That building does still stand today, and the picture was taken from the Buzzcurt Chumley, and you'll see kind of how the building's evolved a little. It's missing some doors it used to have, but the building itself is still there.
I think it's changed now since we've taken it.
That's true. This picture's 2 years old. All right, so this is 301 East Kirkwood. Also known as Dr. Wilson's house. And the reason everybody calls it Dr. Wilson is, well, so many of the people in the generation before us were actually born there. He delivered many children, so a lot of people knew him. But it's funny, actually, before it became Dr. Wilson's house, during the jazz era, it was a jazz bar. And that front little door, they built that into the front of the house just to kind of make it look a little jazzy. But it was torn down before 1975 for the Monroe County Library. So it had to come down, I guess, because that was the space they designated for the new library. And back then we didn't have Bloomington Restorations Incorporated, and we didn't have CFC Cook willing to move big old buildings like that around. All right, so the next one, we'll keep going here. And there we go. So this is Kirkwood and College, sort of the southwest side of the square. What you will notice in the background here on the right, just barely, you can see the old Bradfute building. And the Bradfutes were one of the major newspaper printers in town. Unfortunately, as you can see, the building is now gone. It did catch fire. It wasn't actually destroyed, but later on, they did tear it down. And that's the 1950s on the right versus today. This is the Batman house. A lot of you have probably seen this and know it maybe as the Garrett. This house was actually built for Ira Batman because Ira Batman married a Waldron daughter. And when you married a Waldron daughter, not only did you get a free house, but you got to live right next door to John Waldron Sr. And so John Waldron had a habit of building houses for his daughter's husbands, but they were always really right next door to him. In fact, John Waldron was right across the street here. His mansion is gone, unfortunately.
And that's the big mystery for us is really trying to locate John Waldron Sr.'s home.
A photo of.
We have a picture of this home, of the Batman house, in our book, and you can kind of see
In the background.
in the background his home, but that's the closest that we can get. So this is the big mystery.
Especially for a guy like John Waldron,
Yeah.
who was such a big name in Bloomington. You would think there would be some sort of photo of his house.
Yeah, and the house was torn down in the 50s, so
Yep,
there's
57.
got to be one in somebody's collection that exists somewhere.
Right. So that's the early 1800s meets 2002. This is kind of an interesting story too. This is 509 West Kirkwood in the 1950s. It was owned by Robert Myers. Now, Robert Myers was an interesting character in Bloomington because he was famous for owning the tobacco and candy company. So back then they were kind of hand in hand. You could do both at the same time. Not so much anymore. But what's interesting about this photo is the power line in both photos. You can see that kind of gave, well, Jen, you can tell. That's one of the ways we kind of figure out where the building used to stand.
Yeah,
'Cause-
many of the
go ahead.
telephone poles are still in the same place that they were,
Yep.
80 years ago. So it was really funny. We actually were doing a presentation with the Rotary Club, and Derek kind of made a comment unknowingly that...
A joke?
Yeah, the joke that wasn't...
Unknowing joke?
Yeah, the
In
CEO
front of
or
the CEO, Smithville.
the Smithville telephones was in the audience, so...
I criticized unknowingly the
age of the telephone
the
poles.
age of the
That's what he
telephone
said. He's
poles,
like,
yeah.
I think they're even the same ones.
Yeah, I think a lot of the case they have not changed much. Yes.
There you go.
So as we move on, you'll see that this spot now is a gas station. But the telephone wire is still running right about the same place. So let's move to College and Walnut here. Most of you who have to drive, if you go through Bloomington, drive north or south, these are the main two streets taking you those directions. We'll start on South College, and this is the Benkhart family and the Benkhart Bakery on 112 South College. And the great thing sometimes is not much has changed. It basically looks almost exactly the same. And of course now it's Cartridge World, so they get free advertisements from us. All right, this is the northwest corner of the square, once known as the Bowles Hotel. We later replaced the Bowles, but we did it in chunks. So Bowles, first of all, we lopped off this front end, and we left the back. And then eventually removed the back as well, but it became the Graham Hotel. And that's what it would look like if it still stood today, but as you can see, all parts of it are now without us. And the Graham Plaza was built in 1929, and it, by 1970s and late 60s, was vacant and empty and had, pigeon turds all over it. And actually, Jim Murphy, who's been with CFC Cook, has been a big help on this project. He's given us a lot of old photos, and one of them was when they went in there to renovate this building, and that's how we know about the pigeon droppings. But we also saw the overturned piano. I mean, it's almost as if they got up one day and just decided to leave, and they just left all the seats and seating, but it was a big disaster. So we have the Cole Cook family to thank for that actually looking decent at this point. This is the southwest corner of College and 3rd. Many people know it now because it's the same corner as the convention center, but it also used to be the an old church. Of course, then it became Graham Motor Sales. But the rumor is they used some of the bricks from this old church to build the Graham Motor Sales building in the 1920s. Of course, that's what it looks like today. But not a lot of people know that that used to be a church corner. This is or near the old T of College and 2nd. This is IU in the 1880s. Yeah, later became Bloomington High School. Kind of the giveaway in this one is the railroad tracks. That's how we had to figure out. Of course, I think I had to stand on a hill with one leg up in the air, and but we got about the same building. And well, let's see what it looks like here. You can see the old railroad tracks, and now, of course, it's a Wendy's.
Well, where the railroad tracks are is now.
Yeah. Yep, the new B-line right there on the bottom, right?
You know how the high school got burnt down?
Yes, I do.
I guess a high school kid burned it down.
That's correct. He was trying to impress a lady friend of his. And he thought he could put it out fast enough to be a hero, but unfortunately, as we've been told, some of the waxing they used there just kind of made the fire get out of control much faster than he could be a hero.
But I think
All right.
what I like about this is that you can see that the elevation difference.
Yeah.
Like how much lower it got. I mean, they actually had to dig out all that dirt and kind of start from a whole different level. So
Right. Definitely it has been flattened out some for the parking lot. It was also flattened out in the back later, of course, for the football field. But this is, let's go forward.
Was that the beginning of the university?
That was the beginning of the university, yep. Those were some of the, now the original buildings, of course, were like little wood cabins, you know, what we'd consider almost a log cabin today. But of course, those came down and eventually, those were the big nice official buildings that they built when it was no longer a seminary, but an actual university. Now, this is Bloomington High School. Some of you might remember it. Meets 2011. And today, of course, it's a park. And it stands right about where Ponderosa used to stand, which is now the post office.
And we took this picture before that little mini tornado came
Yeah.
by and kind of got rid of a lot of these, especially the older trees.
Yeah, that's unfortunately. So this is pre-tornado. And it's like that's the only thing it hit was the park, practically. Maybe it was saying something.
Well,
but,
and of course that furniture, that poor little furniture, independent furniture building
oh,
always gets...
yeah, the furniture company back there always gets hit by storms.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move forward. That's what it would look like today if it were still there. Yeah.
But when did it burn?
Burned in 1970. Yeah, that's a good question. Memory's failing me now, but was it earlier than that? Because the photos are all black and white.
I think it was the 70s, real early.
Yeah, yeah, it was the 70s. I can't remember the exact year. I'll get back to you on that one.
They weren't using it.
No.
Well, here's May's Cafe, and if you did go to Bloomington High School, you might remember it because it was either right up the street or you knew Dorn May, who is still around, by the way. Now, May's Cafe was demolished in the 1950s, so this is 405 South Walnut, but it was oddly replaced by the May Building, which is still there today, and it's still called the May Building. It just looks nothing like their old cafe. And of course, the Chocolate Mousse is right next door, if you're familiar with Bloomington. That's kind of a Bloomington establishment. But that would look about right, kind of right where it would be if it still stood today, and that's the whole May family.
Little Ira would have to be, he's the little one, right?
Doran? Yeah, Doran is the small one, yep. So that's May's Cafe. The next one is Bert's Grocery, and this is right after World War II, or very near it, when they finally allow women to go buy stockings again. So it was packed. Everybody was rushing there to get their stockings. And this photo is actually from, it's Bert Sansonia, it was his name, who owned it, and he is a relative of Jim Murphy's wife. So Kathy, Minette Murphy.
I think he was Kathy's grandfather.
Yeah, right, exactly. You must have come here to spy on us, make sure we got it all right, huh?
Kathy worked for me for 16 years.
Oh, well, you know more about her than we do then. Of course, now it's the video saloon upstairs, and they've really kind of worked that building over, but at least it's still standing, and below is the Black Market General Store. All right. That was 7th and Walnut. And that would have been the southwest corner. Yeah.
Yeah, because then like right across the street is
The inner is top.
Taco Bell's right across the street.
And then the
Yeah.
courthouse, right, or the old, wait, what is that?
No,
building?
no. Taco Bell over here, and then the Grand, Harris Grand would have been across the street from it.
Remember the building that we went into, there's the other building that's still old in Bloomington, where we went to do a presentation one time.
Oh, yeah, but that's the old, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But let's not, I can't remember it, so let's move on. All right, the next one, we're just going to jump around Bloomington a little here. This is one of the more beautiful buildings that used to stand on 8th and Fairview on the southeast corner. It burned down not long after it was built. It was built in 1912 and designed by, again, John Nichols. Not surprised there. It was the 8th Street Methodist Church, and it burned down in 1929 or 21. And some people thought it was karma. This is from a local historian who actually believes in karma, because they opposed the building of the colored school, it was called, across the street from them, which eventually was built somewhere else, further away from them in the community. It just so happens that the building burned down right after that. So anyhow, that's his opinion. Let's move forward. And that's where it would stand if it was still there today. That is the brand new Fairview. Yep.
There's been three different buildings in that.
Yeah. Yep. In fact, our son went to the Fairview before this Fairview. And that's what it looked like, but we're still stuck there today.
Is that a wooden building?
It wasn't, no. I believe it was actually made out of stone and limestone, yeah. This is 122 South Washington Street, once the First Baptist, built in 1901, which is really odd because it has another huge church right across the street from it, but it came down and was demolished in 1961 for parking. And now, today, it's the bus station. Of course, we left the horse in so you give you some context. This is one of my absolute favorite houses that no longer exists in Bloomington. It used to stand on the corner of Indiana and 6th Street. In fact, it's 528 East 6th. It was built right around somewhere around 1913. We used to think it maybe was a John Nichols, but we've been able to confirm that it is actually a John Nichols built building since. And there's more information about how we figured that out in the book. It was demolished by 1965 for a parking lot behind the Von Lee.
It's amazing how it fits.
Yeah.
It's perfect for everything.
And of course, it was famous home because it was the Bradfute home. And if you know the Bradfutes, Walter was a big newspaper guy in town, and then his son took over the business after he passed away, Blaine Bradfute. So, yeah, I mean, it had some other historic relevance as well, being the family home for over 40 or 50 years. This is 610 East 3rd Street in the 1950s. This is on the campus of Indiana University. It was demolished before 1961. It's been a fraternity, a sorority, a healthcare building, all kinds of different things. But kind of one of the reasons we were able to make sure we got this one right. Go ahead.
Yeah, pay attention to the chimney, so when I switch over,
This chimney right here, give you a clue.
you can see
It's still there.
that original house is still there.
And they, of course, have changed this whole landscape, really, because they've cut a road right next to it. So the next one, and this is what it would look like if it were still there today. All right, next one. This is 727 East Atwater, and really along Atwater. Atwater used to be clusters of these old Victorians on both sides. They were all kind of cleared out once IU bought the property. Obviously, they needed parking space behind the sororities and the fraternities that lined 3rd Street. So a lot of these came down, and this was on the north side of Atwater, again, demolished for parking. And there is one Victorian left on Atwater. It's on the south side, and it's the only one that's still standing today. And I'm happy to report IU just renovated it. So it looks great again. It was the linguistics building for a long time for IU, but it was in horrible shape. and that's what it looked like if it was still there. This is the Jordan Grill in the 1950s along 3rd Street near Jordan. It's now the west wing of TIS bookstores, you can see now, and it's kind of an example of how buildings can change dramatically. There are no more windows, no more doors. All right, let's do the next one. This is the old Showers building, and this is kind of an interesting one because my son, who at the time I think was 8 years old, saw this before I did. He's like, that's the photo. This is the photo you're looking for right here. As you can see, this is the early 1900s. It was an actual street. And eventually the Showers convinced the city that they needed that street just for themselves, and they didn't really need all that through traffic. And so it was shut down, and it was only a road that Showers used. But now it's, of course, a parking lot, and these photos are about 100 years apart. This is the old Gentry family home, or one of several, on their land on the south side of Bloomington along South Rogers. It's actually 1006 South Rogers. And, of course, if you remember the Gentry Brothers Circus, this was one of many homes on their land, but it was the one that a lot of the core family did live in for quite a while. In fact, the little horse track, well, as you can see today, it's a parking lot for the McDowell Gardens neighborhood. There was a time when people used to walk to go to church, but since everybody started driving, they needed some parking space, and the old Gentry building was getting a little beat up and worn out. But that's where it would about have stood if it was still there today. This is one of the last Italianate, sort of Roman style, one of the last, there's still some left in Bloomington it was the Bynum Supply Company. A lot of people remember their radio jingle. I've never heard it before, but everybody tells me they remember it really well. Yeah. So, unfortunately, this was demolished in 1975 to build a drive-through for the bank, which is next door to it. And the story that you hear from people that worked there and went there to watch it come down said it was built like a rock. And, they slammed the wrecking ball into it and it would come off in huge chunks. It wouldn't just it was so solidly built. So, and it had a neighbor to its right at one point that was almost an exact duplicate of it, and it was gone many years before. So now we're going to move to some brand new slides.
We used to go to that Dandelion shop, when it was...
Okay, so now let's talk about the preservation movement in Bloomington that really got its go in the 1970s. And let's talk about kind of why that happened. We were recently lucky enough to get the Rosemary Miller Preservation Award, which, we didn't know a whole lot about Rosemary. We knew what her legacy was, and we knew that she started the whole movement with the Bloomington Restorations Incorporated group and fighting to save some of these old houses that she thought were being needlessly torn down. And we'll start with one of them here. This is General Morton Hunter. He was a United States congressman. He was a Civil War hero, a general, and he had a beautiful house that he built back in he was born in 1825. This house was built sometime in the 1850s or 60s, and it was known as the Morton Hunter Mansion. And this is what kind of got Rosemary Miller all fired up, is because this house was rezoned from residential to commercial. And the Allen family at the time that owned it said, well, this thing's, first of all, it's all beat up, and I don't know anybody that's going to want to use this for commercial use. So they thought, we're just going to tear it down. Back then, there were no BRIs, there were no cooks, so pretty much the city started to work up an ordinance to stop it from happening, but they couldn't get it done in time. So let's kind of look at it from the air here. This is the 1949 aerial, the last aerial photo of it. And you can see it was a very large structure and had a kind of a walkway out the back, a little garden and a circle and a fountain. It was a pretty fancy building. And if you've ever seen the old photos of the Derby, the old Derby they used to run there down the hill, the soapbox Derby, You'll see this in the background because it was kind of near the start-finish line, or the start line, I'm sorry. So in 1974, as you can see, it was pretty overgrown. We try to put it back in. It works better in the book than it does here. But as you know, the building was eventually demolished, and this really was the beginning in many ways of the preservation movement in Bloomington. In fact, what's interesting, it was the beginning. They actually took this building apart piece by piece, and the columns of this house are actually on a building, because they just gave away parts of the building. It's on another building on Connick Road, which you can almost see from the highway going north on Highway 37. So the column's still standing. This is another building that was saved, thankfully. This is the Morgan House on 532 North Walnut. These old photos are from the 1980s when it was in bad shape. It's right there on the corner of 10th and Walnut. It was bought by Bloomington Restorations in 1980. It was owned by the Torfey family for over 60 years. And actually, it was a part of what was called Widow's Row. Well, I called it that. I guess I coined it that. The reason I coined it that, and this is really, if you look at the 1940 census, one of the things that you notice over and over and over again in Bloomington especially is how many widows there were. There were a lot of widows. Now, the women tended to live longer than men, into their 70s and 80s, but the men, they're usually gone by their 50s or 60s. So this row of houses was actually all full of famous names. Bertha Showers lived in one, the one just south of this one, and Nellie Teeter lived in the one just south of this one, and that was 520, 528, and 532. All of them, of course, the Showers brothers, and that was Bertha's connection to that. And Nellie Teeter, her husband, of course, Teeter Hall, of IU being named up, and she was a real activist of her own for women's education. But Karen Torfey owned this, and eventually her daughter, Margaret, was living there all by herself, and the house was about to fall apart. I believe she sold it to BRI for $1, and then they fixed it up. And that's what it looks like today. Yep. Also interesting house because it was the first house with a pool in the back. And it's still there today, and when you walk up to it, it's roughly 10 feet by 20 feet, and it's just cement walls, and they used to just fill that up and go swimming back there. This is another example of some restoration. Again, this one was done by CFC Cook. This is the old Monon Depot, which now sits at 6th and Morton. And you can see in the 1970s, it was in pretty bad shape. The next one is looking at the back of the convention center and riding down what used to be Morton Street, which, of course, the railway ran right there. And, of course, now it's the Beeline Trail. And on the left, it is now a parking lot. Morton does not. You can no longer take Morton Street all the way up to the center of town any longer. But another example of how things have changed, or stayed the same, excuse me, but it's used in a different way. The Beeline is a really, people are using that like crazy in Bloomington, especially on the first sunny day we had yesterday. That place was packed. So the Beeline has really turned out to be a big success in Bloomington. All right, this is the northeast corner. No, it's not, actually. This is the old Waldron building, which was City Hall. And this is actually when they were building it in 1912. Yeah, I got the cards out of order. So this is formerly City Hall. In the 1960s, it became a police station. And the actual old police jail, you can see it in the far right, is to the right of this building. And of course, that burned down to the right of this building, the old photo. This is Dunn Meadow. And this is the World War I era. I put this in here because I thought it was interesting. A, it hasn't changed much since then, except there are more trees. But B, in the World War I era, it was used for parading. And then in the 1930s, it became a golf course. And then in 1911, prior to that, a Curtiss aviator actually tried or attempted to land a biplane in Dunmeadow and wrecked and crashed. And he survived the accident, but that's a lot of uses for a little thin strip of land. And that's kind of comparing yesterday to today, and as you can see, as I said, it really hasn't changed that much view-wise. I left a few of the paraders in the new photo. This is the old Harris Grand. And of course, as many of you know, it did burn down. It burned several times. The last one, that was enough. They were done rebuilding that thing, and they did tear it down. On the right, you can see that the movie is starring Catherine Feltis Craig, and of course, the Feltis name is very famous in Bloomington. She was a big movie star, and so all her movies, because she was from Bloomington, would play at this locally, and they were big hits. And of course, she just recently died in 2004, so not long from now. But anyhow, the Harris Grand was great because, John Nichols built it, but everybody used to come. Bob Hope used to play there. It later on became the town cinema and got chopped up into 3 different pieces where they would show 2 normal movies and I believe even adult movies later on. So, it didn't have the greatest reputation by the time it burned down. In fact, I have some old photos from the 70s where there are people protesting outside the town cinema. And I believe that was, I don't even want to say the name of that movie. I don't think that would be a good idea here. Anyhow, it was built in 1906 and it burned down in 1981. I added this because it's the north side of the square and not much has changed. And some of this is just kind of maybe a little emotional, but it's nice to see that the building has really maintained most of its structure. But I also like the fact that you can kind of imagine this gentleman from the 1940s walking across the street today in the very same way he would have in 70 years ago. Now this is our last one for the day. This is the post office in the background, which you can see across 3rd Street looking north. And this is the 1930s meets 2013. What's really interesting, and a lot of people don't know, well, there are a couple things in here. You'll see the dome of the church has changed pretty significantly because the dome on the right burned. So when they rebuilt it, they got kind of lazy and just made it into a castle sort of thing. So they didn't have to build that big dome again. But the post office, when it was built in 1957, prior to it, that whole block was an actual neighborhood. Some of the houses were great big Victorians, others were just really nice houses that have been there in the family for years. And the locals, I was talking to George Carpenter, who is a historian, Indiana historian, some of you may know. And I said, George, didn't anybody complain when they told everybody they had to move out of their house and they used eminent domain and said, move out now? He said, nobody really said much back then because you just did what you were kind of supposed to do. And that was kind of sad. But then he said, as a little kid, he used to, before they bulldozed the whole area, they used to use all those empty houses for playing cowboys and Indians and shooting their imaginary guns at each other. And he said, but one of the buildings he said I could remember said curses to local government or whatever it said. So he said people were not unhappy. We're not totally happy with being forced to move out. Of course, on the right where that little column is, that is the old Letelier Bakery building. And today it is an insurance, realty building. So, yeah.
Now, that's the old post office, right?
Yeah, that post office got closed down as well now.
Yeah.
We have a really
Who owns
tiny
that
one.
property?
The church.
The church owns
That's
it.
correct, yeah. But,
Presbyterian Church.
yep, the people used to own the property first. But what happened is, as we move forward, the next slide, here's that block. You can see the black indicates where the post office was built, but you can see all the homes that used to be on this one block. So 14 homes in all were bulldozed and razed, and 17 dwellings in total. The thing about the square is that some of Bloomington's most, the auditor used to live in here. The building on the top left was Claude Mallet, the mayor of Bloomington at one point in the 30s. That's where he lived and where his wife Maud lived until she was in her 80s. So in 1957, this all came down, and I don't think that could happen today in quite the same way. Actually, this is the last one. This is the old poorhouse, and this is, never... Yeah, everyone had a poorhouse because, as you know, we didn't have the same sort of support systems back then. So if you went broke and you couldn't pay your bills and you couldn't feed yourself and your kids, you went off to the poorhouse. Unfortunately, if you were very old and you died there and you had no money and they didn't have any place to bury you, really, you either got buried somewhere out in the field, or in many cases, they would send the bodies to IU to be used as medical cadavers. In fact, we've gone through all the records of a lot of the people that died at the poorhouse. Frankly, we can't find out where most of them were buried, and we've tried pretty darn hard. But we did hear from someone who used to work with Dr. Adams at IU University that, in fact, at one point when they were digging up the ground to build Morrison Hall at IU, they stumbled across all these skeletons and human skulls, and they said, "What's going on here?" So the construction guys went and they got the police and the locals, and they all looked at the situation, and I guess Adams finally came in and said, "No, that's where they used to bury the cadavers after they would use them for whatever they did." So anyhow, this was finally demolished in 1969. There was some talk for a while of using the poorhouse as a museum, but that just didn't work out. And of course now, it's Karst Park.
Didn't somebody who lived there was responsible for tearing it down?
Yeah, actually, a gentleman, last name Rogers, I'm not sure if he's related to, or he probably is, to some of the Rogers family, but as a child, he had to spend some time growing up at the poorhouse because his family was very poor. And so when they decided to tear this down, he did it for $1. He hated this building so much because he grew up there as a child. Yep. So this is what it looked like in its more glorious state before it became torn to pieces. And Michael Carter, a friend of mine who was a youngster in the 60s, said, "I used to go out there and throw rocks at it and break the windows, and that's why it was such a total mess by the time they demolished it in '69. And if it were still there today, well, this is the spot where here at Karst Park where it would stand. And I think I put it back in, didn't I? Nope. Oh, well, I guess I didn't. That's in the 2 additional slides. All right. So anyhow, so that's all we have from now. I guess we'll just take... Oh, there it is. I guess that's what it would look like today if it were still there. So I guess now we have to take some questions. But before we do, you can find us on Facebook at Bloomington Fading. You can we now have a website, actually, called Bloomington Then and Now, WordPress.com. You can email us if you have any questions at Bloomington Then and Now. If you have any great pictures of Monroe County, send them our way, email them to us. We'll do some then and now photos of them. But I guess now it's time for questions. Yeah. Well, maybe this will inspire someone to do kind of a then and now of Bedford too. And yeah, okay, good. Because looking around, you have a lot of very beautiful buildings here in town. However, even in my then and now experiences, I have people who are friends with us on Facebook who now live in Bedford, used to live in Bloomington, but they'll send me photos of old Bedford, of buildings that are now gone here in town as well. So you have your own missing gems. Yeah. Yes. I think what's great about the whole Facebook and social media aspect of this is it's gotten everybody involved. I mean, we have 3,000 people who are regularly on that Facebook page, communicating, sharing old stories. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, it's amazing. We have some friends in their 80s and even their 90s who are using Facebook, and they're pretty comfortable with it. It just takes some time to get used to. What the city has been doing, which maybe they wouldn't even considered in the past, and really they usually depend on Cook to do this, is they'll buy an old building and then they'll have it fixed up and they'll try to find some sort of other use for it. But really, because BRI and because Cook do so much of that for Bloomington, they really don't have to get as involved as a lot of other cities and towns do who are trying to kind of protect their old houses and buildings. There are certain parts of town they have definitely gobbled up. Between 10th Street and 13th on sort of the east side of town. They have kind of gobbled up that, and that whole community from what was College all the way to Indiana is all students now. But it used to be a residential community there's a church in that neighborhood too that's very old, that's now a psychology building. So yeah, they gobbled up that. But the amazing thing about IU is I'll give them this much credit. I know they get blamed for tearing down old buildings, and they have torn down their fair share, but I'll tell you what, between 1950 and 1975, they tore down a whole lot less than we just tore down ourselves. We did most of the damage, or the development was done not by IU at all. In fact, they've been pretty good about preservation recently, and they actually were required at one point required themselves to document and photograph every building they tore down.
About around the fall.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.